July 20, 1967, Los Angeles, California. 7 people stood in that cramped, dimly lit dojo. The tension in the room wasn't just in the air, it was in the way they moved, their eyes locked on what would unfold. Bruce Lee, already a name people whispered in martial arts circles, had never spoken of this. Never. What happened behind those closed doors was something the world wasn't supposed to know. Bruce Lee never spoke about it. Those who were there would never forget. What they saw that day changed how they understood him. In the mid-1960s, Bruce Lee was a man caught between worlds. On the surface, he was an established martial artist, known for his impressive appearances in television and film. His most famous role, Kato in the Green Hornet, had earned him a decent reputation, but it wasn't the fame that had captured his soul, it was the pursuit of an ideal. To Bruce Lee, martial arts wasn't just a fight, it was a way of being. His journey had begun in Hong Kong, where he studied under the legendary Yip Man and developed his own philosophy and technique, Jeet Kune Do. But in the United States, his reputation was still controversial. Many viewed him as a brash outsider, an Asian in a predominantly white, American martial arts world. His unconventional methods, his rejection of traditional forms, and his insistence on adapting techniques for real-life combat set him apart from the classical schools of martial arts. For many, he was a threat to the established system. Others called him an imposter, someone more focused on theatrics than on true mastery. But Bruce knew that the fight wasn't just in the ring. The real battle was proving the validity of his approach, to show the world that martial arts could be something new, something greater. In 1967, Bruce Lee was determined to break through the barriers of perception and enter a new phase of his journey, becoming a true bridge between martial arts and real-world application. And then, the challenge came. It wasn't an official match, but the rumors were undeniable. There was a man, a martial artist who had heard of Bruce's reputation and was eager to test it. It wasn't just about proving who was the better fighter, it was about something deeper, something that Bruce could never have anticipated. This man, like many others, had heard of the young Chinese fighter who seemed to defy the laws of martial physics. But unlike most, he wasn't intimidated. He had fought before, against men with reputations, against men who had made their names in the world of martial arts, and he was prepared to test Lee in a way that hadn't been done before. But why this challenge mattered was more than just ego. It wasn't a stunt for publicity. It wasn't for the cameras. This man believed in the rawness of physical confrontation, the need to test the strongest to see if their skill and philosophy could withstand real danger. The winner, in his eyes, would not just be the better fighter, they would prove the legitimacy of their path. For Bruce, this challenge wasn't a game. It would push him to the limits of his control, to a place where even he was uncertain of the outcome. The reputation of Jeet Kune Do was on the line. The man who sought out Bruce Lee was known in certain circles as the practitioner. His real name was something of a mystery, obscured by the years and the legends that surrounded him. But those who had witnessed his skill remembered him well, tall, broad-shouldered, with a look of quiet intensity that belied his experience. A seasoned martial artist from the Midwest, the practitioner had spent years traveling, testing his techniques against every style he could find, from karate masters to street brawlers. What made him dangerous wasn't just his size or his strength, it was his understanding of combat. He wasn't a showman, not like the flamboyant boxers or the theatrical martial artists that filled the silver screens of Hollywood. No, the practitioner had an old-school approach. He relied on brutal, effective strikes and an almost animalistic sense of timing, anticipating his opponent's movements as if he could feel them before they happened. What made him credible in the eyes of many martial artists was his reputation for surviving deadly encounters. He wasn't the kind of man who talked about his victories, he didn't boast. His style wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to subdue, to neutralize threats. If you were unfortunate enough to face him, you wouldn't leave unscathed. But it wasn't his skill alone that made this challenge stand out. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This wasn't a man trying to make a name by calling out a Hollywood actor. The practitioner was motivated by something deeper. His belief in martial arts was rooted in a fundamental principle: combat should be pure. The line between form and reality, between technique and destruction, had to be tested in its truest form. The challenges he issued were never easy, and his pride didn't lie in defeating opponents with ease. He wanted to test himself, to fight someone who claimed to have surpassed traditional boundaries, someone whose philosophy spoke of adaptability and fluidity, but who hadn't yet faced someone with the experience of real violence. The practitioner had heard whispers of Bruce Lee's invincibility, of his speed, his precision, his seemingly effortless skill. But the question lingered: was it all smoke and mirrors? Could a man who claimed to be beyond traditional martial arts truly hold his ground in a real confrontation? This challenge wasn't about a grudge or personal animosity. It was about an ideological fight, a fight between the traditional and the new, between the tried and tested and the untested. The practitioner wasn't interested in a quick win. He was searching for a crack, a weakness, something that would reveal the truth behind Lee's approach. He was prepared for this. And in his mind, this wasn't just a fight for bragging rights, this was a fight for history. The dojo was hidden in an unassuming building on the edge of Los Angeles. A quiet, nearly forgotten corner of the city, where the echoes of traffic and the clamor of the outside world seemed miles away. The space was small, barely wide enough for the two men to move comfortably. A low ceiling, exposed brick walls, and no air conditioning, it was a relic of a time before gyms became high-tech and sleek. This was no commercial dojo, no flashy gym designed for tourists or enthusiasts. This was a training ground where martial artists came to get real, where they tested their limits in the harshest of conditions. The room had a single fluorescent light hanging above them, casting long shadows against the walls. The floor was nothing but worn-out mats, their surface scratched from years of use. There were no trophies, no banners. No audience. Just the two men and the weight of the moment. The only sounds were the soft rustle of feet shifting on the mats and the steady rhythm of their breathing. The stakes, though, were enormous. It wasn't just about the fight, it was about proving a belief. Bruce Lee had to face not only a physical opponent but the weight of every critic who had ever doubted him. The practitioner was there, not just to challenge him, but to push him to the edge of his own abilities. For Bruce, this was a proving ground, a place where the stakes were nothing less than his reputation and the validity of his philosophy. The terms of the match were simple. There were no referees, no rules. They had agreed that they wouldn't fight to the death, but beyond that, anything went. The only boundary was survival. They both knew that whoever walked away from this fight would carry a scar, either physical or psychological, that would shape them forever. The atmosphere was heavy with the unspoken truth: this wasn't going to be a traditional martial arts demonstration. There would be no slow-motion moves or rehearsed sequences. The fight would be real, raw, and unforgiving. The witnesses to this match were few, but their presence was palpable. A small group of Bruce's closest confidants, along with a few select individuals who had known of the practitioner's reputation, watched in silence. They stood in a corner, their faces a mixture of anticipation and unease. Some had seen Bruce fight before, but none of them had seen him in such a dangerous situation. They knew Bruce's skill, his speed, and his mastery, but they also knew that this was no controlled exhibition. There was no choreography here. This was the real deal. No one knew what was going to happen next. Not even Bruce. The emotional atmosphere in the room was thick. It wasn't just a test of physicality, it was a test of identity. Bruce had spent years crafting his persona, but now it would be stripped down to the barest elements of his being. Was he truly the fighter everyone believed him to be? Would his philosophy hold up under the pressure of real violence? There was a darkness in the room, a sense of foreboding that only grew with each passing second. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving dominance. It was about survival, and everything Bruce Lee believed in was going to be tested. The fight began with a moment of stillness. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. The tension was palpable, as if the air itself was waiting for something to snap. And then, with a sudden, precise movement, Bruce Lee stepped forward. The first strike came swiftly, almost imperceptibly. Bruce's lead hand shot out like a blur, a lightning-fast jab aimed at the practitioner's head. But the challenger was ready. He moved with calculated precision, not merely blocking, but redirecting the punch, using the momentum of Bruce's attack to his advantage. The force of the blow deflected off the practitioner's forearm, but there was no time to react. Bruce's follow-up came in a split second, a vicious roundhouse kick aimed at the side of his opponent's head. The practitioner ducked, narrowly avoiding the strike, and countered with a low, sweeping kick aimed at Bruce's legs. The movement was sudden and brutal, a challenge to Bruce's balance and speed. But Bruce, ever aware, sidestepped, his foot grazing the mat with perfect control as he avoided the attack by mere inches. The room was silent except for the rhythmic sound of their feet sliding across the worn mats. Every movement was measured, every strike carefully calculated. But what was most striking was how the fight unfolded not with chaotic intensity, but with an eerie calmness. This wasn't just two fighters exchanging blows, it was an intricate, deadly dance of wits and reflexes. Bruce Lee's famous speed was undeniable, but the practitioner had a different kind of speed, a stillness that came from years of watching and waiting, of knowing when to strike and when to retreat. It became clear very quickly that Bruce was in a different kind of fight. He had faced opponents before, but none like this. This man didn't rely on flashy techniques or dramatic moves. There was no grandeur in his attacks, only efficiency, precision, and a constant, underlying pressure. Bruce could feel the challenge growing with every second. The practitioner was not just a threat to his body, he was a threat to his entire approach. If Bruce couldn't adjust, couldn't find a way to crack this unrelenting defense, the fight could slip away from him. Bruce's mind raced, but his body stayed calm. His strikes were clean, sharp, a blur of calculated violence, but it was becoming increasingly evident that the practitioner wasn't fazed. His eyes never left Bruce's, his movements always in sync with Bruce's. Where Bruce was fluid and dynamic, the practitioner was a rock, unyielding, unmovable. The tension in the room escalated with each passing exchange. The fight was far from over, but the direction was becoming clear. Bruce was facing a man who wasn't just a threat to his body, he was a threat to Bruce's very understanding of what it meant to fight. And then, just as Bruce executed a quick combination of strikes, one of them landed, but not the way he expected. The practitioner didn't react with pain or even anger. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and in the briefest moment, he adjusted his posture, as if the punch had revealed something deeper. Bruce could see it now, the practitioner wasn't just reacting to his movements, he was studying them. He was looking for a weakness. It was the first crack in Bruce's composure. He had to move faster. He had to get better. Or he would lose. The fight had shifted. No longer was it about technique or flash. It had become a raw test of endurance, a battle of wills, of minds as much as bodies. The practitioner's movements were precise, cold. Every strike, every block felt less like an exchange and more like a calculated measurement of Bruce's weaknesses. It was as if he was waiting for Bruce to make a mistake, and Bruce knew it. He could feel the weight of every action he took, knowing that the slightest error could lead to catastrophe. A sharp pain shot through Bruce's side. The practitioner had landed a clean, perfectly executed sidekick to Bruce's ribs, driving him back a few feet. He staggered, but only for a moment. He quickly regained his stance, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of pain and focus. The bruise would come later, but now there was no time for pain. No time for hesitation. The practitioner, like a predator, moved in with cold precision. He saw Bruce stagger, and in an instant, he closed the distance, his hands reaching out for Bruce's neck. It was a move Bruce had anticipated, but not with the speed the practitioner brought. In one fluid motion, Bruce ducked under the outstretched hands, but the grip was too quick. For a moment, Bruce could feel the crushing force of the other man's hands around his throat. The weight of the chokehold was suffocating, and the panic, the fear, began to rise in his chest. The room seemed to close in around him. His breath grew shallow, his muscles weakening from the lack of air. The stakes had escalated beyond the physical. Now, it was about survival. Bruce's mind raced as his body fought the constriction. He had been in tight spots before, but never like this. This wasn't just a fight for victory, it was a fight to keep his control, to retain his dignity. To prove that his way of fighting, his philosophy of adaptability, of fluidity, was more than just words. If he couldn't escape this hold, everything he believed in would be shattered. This was no longer a battle of physical skill alone, this was a battle of identity. His fingers, now slick with sweat, clawed at the practitioner's arm, looking for a way to break free. The pressure on his neck grew tighter. He could feel his body weaken, his mind clouding from the lack of oxygen. Every instinct told him to give in, to tap out. To submit. But then, a flash of clarity. Bruce realized, with startling certainty, that he was at a crossroads. He had trained his entire life for this moment, but it wasn't just about brute force. It was about knowing when to yield, when to control. He had always been in control of his body, his thoughts, his actions, but now, his very philosophy was being tested. This wasn't just about who could dominate the other physically. It was about whether Bruce could control himself, his emotions, his fear. If he let anger or desperation take over, he might break his opponent. But he could also break himself in the process. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to survive this hold, but he had to find it. He had to prove to himself that his philosophy of control, of not reacting out of pure aggression, was the right one. In that moment, Bruce made a choice. His hands, now bloodied and raw from his struggle, slowly stopped fighting the chokehold. Instead, he relaxed. He released the tension in his body, allowing the pressure to guide him, using the force of the practitioner's movements against him. With one sharp twist, he freed his neck and struck back with brutal efficiency, not with power, but with precision. A lightning-fast elbow to the ribs, a kick to the knee, and Bruce was free. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The practitioner stood back, sweat dripping from his brow, eyes wide with surprise and respect. Bruce, gasping for air, felt something inside of him shift. He hadn't defeated the man, not yet. But he had proven something far more important, that control could be just as powerful as force. And that he had more to give than even he knew. The room was still. Both men stood there, each caught in the intensity of the moment, understanding that this fight was no longer about winning. It was about what they were willing to risk to stay true to themselves. The fight ended not with a clear winner, but with an undeniable shift. The practitioner stepped back, his chest heaving as he wiped the sweat from his brow. Bruce Lee stood, equally exhausted, his body bruised but his mind clearer than it had been in a long time. There were no words exchanged. No gestures of victory or defeat. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was a different kind of tension, the kind that arises when something unspoken has been revealed. In the hours that followed, the two men spoke little. The practitioner left the dojo without a word, his purpose for the challenge now complete. He had tested Bruce Lee, not just physically, but philosophically. And though he may have walked away with respect for Bruce's abilities, he had also learned something about his own limits. There was no great concession of defeat, no grand acknowledgement of victory. The challenge had been answered, but the answer was never about proving who was better. It was about understanding the price of mastery, and realizing that even those at the top of their game had vulnerabilities. As for Bruce, the fight left scars, both physical and emotional. The bruise on his side would fade, but the lesson would linger. The practitioner had pushed him beyond his own control, forcing Bruce to confront the real danger of his own philosophy. In the heat of the moment, Bruce had questioned his own ability to hold back, to stay true to the principles that he had spent years perfecting. And though he had ultimately prevailed, it was only by embracing a part of himself that he often feared, his capacity for restraint. The witnesses who had observed the fight spoke in hushed tones for years afterward. They spoke of Bruce Lee's speed, his precision, but they also spoke of something else, something that wasn't visible on the surface. They spoke of a man who, in the midst of a fight for his life, had chosen not to destroy his opponent. Instead, Bruce had chosen to control the situation, a decision that may have cost him his immediate victory, but had cemented his legacy as a fighter who truly understood the balance between power and restraint. For Bruce, the challenge had been transformative. It had forced him to look inward, to question not just his physical abilities but his emotional resilience. He realized that being a true martial artist wasn't just about defeating opponents, but about facing the greatest adversary of all, oneself. Years later, when asked about the fight, Bruce would say little. He spoke of his experiences, but he never revealed the full extent of what had transpired in that quiet, forgotten dojo. The legacy of that moment, the fight that no one had seen, the challenge that had been buried by time, remained hidden in the shadows of his public persona. And yet, the story lived on. Those who had been there would never forget. The strongest man in the room is not the one who wins. It's the one who knows exactly how much damage he chose not to do.